Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We are recording this session just to make you aware. And if you're joining us now, thank you very much. Your camera and mics are muted. We really welcome questions in the chat. And today I'm delighted to welcome you to the Energy Security and Green Infrastructure event. We're part of a series of events happening all week, and we invite you to take a look at the agenda to see the other events that are happening across the UK. So welcome everybody to the Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week event. I'm Dr. Victoria Hands, Director of Sustainability at the Open University. And today we have set a question for our expert panel. And that question is, what would it take for hydrogen to have a place in the UK's net zero energy future? You may well have your views and we would welcome those. We'd welcome questions for our panel, and we will be have a time at the end for Q&A with our panel. So here you can see our distinguished panel. And today we're really delighted to have representation from across the Open Universities. So we've got our Professor of Energy, William Nuttall, Bill. We've got a lecturer in Sustainability in the Smart Environment, Dr. Tarek Rashwan. We've got two research students and postgraduate researchers. So we really draw from across our community. So thank you, Marc, for joining us, and thank you, Harri. And we're really looking forward to hearing from your live research. So it looks like we may still be joined by other people, but I'm just going to kick off. We're delighted to be sponsoring the Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. And today's panel on hydrogen is to explore the detail of what it would take for hydrogen to have a place in the UK's net zero energy future. So to start, we'd like to know, where are you from, so we can pitch a little bit. So we're going to go immediately into a poll. If you've joined us through MS Teams, you will be able to participate in that poll. So we're just going to put that poll up, and we'd love to know your background. Where are you from? So if you'd like to click on your poll feature there. This is anonymised, but you will be able to say whether you're a student at the OU or another university, whether you're a member of staff, whether you're from the public sector or the private sector. So if you'd like to vote now in that poll, we'll know who we are. And you can submit the poll, and we should all be able to see the answers. So welcome. So we're mainly OU staff. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a fair number, almost a quarter of students, and then it's about neck and neck, the public and private sector. So welcome everybody. That really enables us to pitch today. And we're going to do a second poll. And the second poll is about your level of awareness of hydrogen. So this is a new area. We're all learning together, and the Open University is really open to learning and collaborating. So how aware are you? What is your awareness of hydrogen? And I would say that I'm not very aware. So please be honest, and we'll be able to pitch. So we have some people, the majority of people are fairly aware. So it looks like we've got industry and knowledgeable people with us. Yes, so the majority of us are aware and knowledgeable, and then some of us are very advanced. And our final poll, just before we kick off, is, and you can submit, this is a word cloud we're going to generate together. What is the first word that comes to your mind? Please just put one word in and we'll co-create a word cloud. What's the first word that comes to your mind when you think about hydrogen? That's great. And as you can see, yeah, future, clean, renewable, vector. There we go. So we've got about half the audience participated. What's the first word that you think of? Future, clean, green. Seem to be the biggest words coming through. So that really helps the panel, and that helps us to be a bit interactive and get to know each other as much as we can in a webinar. So now, thank you very much everybody for participating in that. So with that wordle in mind, a clean, a green future, I'm going to hand over to Tarek and to do a little introduction on hydrogen, and let's see if those words are what the panel is bringing to us. Thank you very much, Tarek.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So I'm excited to be here on the panel with distinguished fellow panelists. And just wanted to highlight, of course, we are all aware, well aware of the need to transition to net zero swiftly. And hydrogen, as many folks had alluded to in the poll, can help us reach those goals by becoming a key part of the future green infrastructure and in bolstering energy security. So just to introduce the figure I have here, this is from a colleague from the University of Edinburgh, Dr. Ali Hassanpour's band. And this figure illustrates the different ways in which hydrogen can be interwoven within our energy landscape. And hydrogen, as the panel, the poll had suggested, can provide a low carbon energy source that is broadly compatible with our existing infrastructure. It's transportable, as Marc will get into later on, and it's storable, as Harri will discuss. So with hydrogen, we can produce carbon-free energy using conventional combustion systems, but also using fuel cells. We can use hydrogen to improve the energy efficiency and usability of renewables. So we'll get into that a little bit throughout the panel too. And we can use hydrogen to decarbonize industries that are challenging to electrify. So these could be heavy industries like steelmaking or long-haul transport. And I just wanted to highlight, from a combustion science point of view, hydrogen is kind of a natural solution to carbon emissions from combustion systems. And a reason for that is that hydrogen combustion, it's relatively well understood. And that's because hydrogen combustion follows a relatively simple set of reaction pathways compared to traditional hydrocarbon fuels. And in fact, many combustion scientists use hydrogen combustion to calibrate their models. So I just wanted to bring that tidbit in to highlight that there's really a strong and robust understanding of hydrogen and how it can be integrated in energy systems. So one thing I want to highlight from this figure as well is hydrogen can come from many different sources. Some of those sources are non-renewable, and hydrogen, and from those sources, the carbon can be sequestered. But hydrogen can also be generated from renewable sources using electrolysis. And so when the sun is shining bright and the wind is blowing strong, excess energy generated from solar and wind can be used to generate hydrogen. And that generated hydrogen from the excess energy can be transported to regions with an energy deficit. Alternatively, that hydrogen that was generated can be stored locally and used when the sun isn't shining and when the wind's not blowing. So hydrogen has the potential to address both energy, renewable energy intermittency, as well as renewable energy non-uniformities. So with that, I will pass it along to Bill to take us from there.
Well, thank you, Tarek. It's good to have that overview, and thank you for that. I think Babette is going to put up a figure to illustrate my remarks in the next stage. The question that Victoria opened with for everybody explicitly made reference to the United Kingdom. And I appreciate that climate change is a global problem, but I'd like to show here some British data. And this is work by Grant Wilson, who was then at Sheffield University, and now he's part of Birmingham Energy Institute at Birmingham University. And I mention that because if you go to the Birmingham Energy Institute, you can find the updated version of this slide, which covers 2018 to 2021. But that rather distractingly includes the pandemic, where interesting things happened in energy. And I'm here to make a different point. So I'm going to use the older data, which makes the point well. And when we don't have a global pandemic, it still actually represents current realities reasonably well. So here we're looking at the total of the British energy system. And what we see is along the bottom is the electricity system, and it has little ripples in it, and you can see the weekend in the little ripples. And there's a little bit of seasonality in it. And then above it, you see a rather jagged line. That's petroleum, basically. That's transport fuels. That's cars and buses and things like that, right? Which you see is twice the size, roughly, of the electricity system. And then you have a highly seasonal energy use, which is natural gas. And the majority of British homes are natural gas central heated, and also industry and the service economy also uses natural gas for heating. So that's the blue line, the very, very seasonal line, which peaks, of course, in the winter. We're a winter peaking country. We don't have much air conditioning load in this country, for example. Okay, so then the point comes that let's regard the electricity use as, let's say, 1 unit, just to keep things simple, right? So you see that the transport use is twice as big, so that's 2 units. And in the winter, in January and February, the gas system is 3 times the electricity system, roughly. That's 3 units. So on a winter's day, for the energy system today and 10 years ago, the electricity system is about 1/6 of the total. Now, I'm of the view, personally, that when you hear voices about the coming importance of electrification, that's correct. There will be a significant growth in electrification, the use of electricity. And by that, I mean low carbon electricity, primarily from renewables and nuclear energy. But I personally don't think by 2050, we're going to see a 6-fold increase. Now, people point to the fact that electrical energy conversion processes are very efficient. Efficiency will deliver in a way that means we maybe don't need 6 units. We might only need 5 or 4.5. But I think that the stretch of making the whole system electrical by 2050 is pretty difficult. So I think there's a need to decarbonize without using electricity what is currently covered by natural gas and petroleum. And that means the molecular solution that's low carbon, and that takes me towards hydrogen and my enthusiasm for hydrogen. I should declare that my other kind of energy passion is nuclear power, but that's for another day. Okay, I have a huge respect and interest in renewables, but I leave that area for others because there's a lot of expertise in that area. Okay, so this is the overview of electrification, I'd suggest, and Babette, I think you can take the slide down now. The next thing is, so I think I've tried to make a case that I think hydrogen could be important as a low carbon energy carrier in the future. The thing then is, well, where does the hydrogen come from, and what are the valid claims for its low carbon status? Because you have to look at the whole life cycle analysis, the nature of the supply chain, and all the risks that might be associated with that to get a proper understanding of its environmental impact. And Tarek has basically mentioned the 2 main options, but let's unpack it a little. So one would be to use electricity from renewable sources. Quite often in a large-scale renewable-based electricity system, that we can expect times when generation is high and demand is low, and why not usefully send that electricity into a storage process, which we could mediate with hydrogen, and we'd be making hydrogen, which we could use, and that's typically called green hydrogen. Right? And it would be a big business. I've said electrification will be a big business. Some part of that will be a hydrogen storage business, and that will be a big business, measured, let's say, in billions of pounds. But I personally take the view that hydrogen is going to be an enormous business, much bigger than that. I recognize that the natural gas business today is a $1 trillion industry globally, not a $1 billion industry. And I see a transition whereby we go from natural gas to hydrogen as the retail product. And I think led, with my personal view, largely led by, from this point on at least, industry. Okay, so I've mentioned green hydrogen, but I've hinted at something else. I've hinted at we're going to be needing hydrogen bigger than what green hydrogen can produce, even when we greatly increase the production of green hydrogen. So where's that hydrogen coming from? Well, it's coming from the natural gas. The natural gas business, I think, will become the hydrogen business and other low carbon synthetic fuels. Marc is going to unpack a little bit about what the supply chain will look like and at which point it actually becomes hydrogen. But fundamentally, I think that we're going to be talking about a natural gas business, this very large $1 trillion business, moving over to a hydrogen business. But the problem is today people make hydrogen from natural gas. About 96% of hydrogen that's sold today is made that way. And all of it vents carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, except a very small amount that makes carbon monoxide for plastics and stuff. But basically, it's extremely polluting process, and that can't go on. So the issue becomes, okay, if we're going to make hydrogen from natural gas, how do we do it more cleanly? And that takes us to what's called blue hydrogen, which is to couple this technology with carbon capture and storage. So to take the carbon dioxide from that process and store it underground. And maybe in the panel discussion, we might pick up, a bit more about the CCS, to use the jargon, aspects of blue hydrogen. But I would say just briefly that if you were looking around the world for the best source of CO2 to try carbon capture and storage with, actually a hydrogen production facility would be very, very attractive. Much more attractive than trying to get carbon dioxide out of the smokestack of a power station, for example. I can unpick this in the discussion perhaps later, but I suggest a very nice potential coupling between natural gas-based hydrogen manufacture and carbon capture and storage. And this is the world of blue hydrogen, which, if and when it works, will be a low carbon solution. The problem, one of the problems, there are multiple problems. There are problems with green hydrogen as well, but I think the main tricky issue with blue hydrogen is leakage. Not leakage of carbon dioxide, but leakage of methane, the natural gas, because it's an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. It's not as long-lived as CO2, but it's very, very powerful as a greenhouse gas. So leaks must be absolutely minimized. Something that the international oil companies, natural gas companies are already focused on, leak minimization, but that becomes absolutely important as we move to consider blue hydrogen. So I've mentioned green, I've mentioned blue. There's actually a whole rainbow set of colors around hydrogen, and Marc might pick this up later. There's pink and red and purple. That's if you use nuclear energy. There's the very interesting world of white or gold hydrogen, which is actually geological hydrogen, which hydrogen is not just an energy carrier. There is actually geological hydrogen. But the dominant ones that are talked about the most are green and blue. I think I've introduced them. But I would say finally, as a policy person in energy, while these color descriptions can be helpful pedagogically to help understand the upstream, I really don't like them as kind of propositions at the retail level. I don't think that people who are buying hydrogen 20 years from now will, be sold green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. I hope not. I hope they're sold a hydrogen product where the hydrogen goes into the system, and if it has to pay its dues for carbon or leakage, then it will. But once it's in the system, I hope it's fully traded like the energy products of today. So with those various remarks said, I'm going to hand it back to Tarek, I think.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think this putting the colors into context in showing, because we often talk about green hydrogen as the ultimate goal, but of course the transition to getting to green hydrogen is not necessarily as straightforward, and that's going to require there's going to be some intermittent activity in the medium term. And I think the way that you've positioned blue hydrogen as being really the strong way to deliver the hydrogen future, I think that's a very important message and very interesting. Okay, so with that, I would like to hand it over to Harri to talk about large-scale hydrogen storage.
Thank you, Tarek, and yeah, thank you everyone for taking your time to listen to this today. So I'm going to talk to you about what I'm currently researching, which is the storage of hydrogen, and in particular the large-scale storage of hydrogen in natural geological formations. So as Tarek and Bill were saying, hydrogen is hopefully going to be a big player to ensure we meet our climate goals throughout the world. And as Bill was saying, we're going to be producing hydrogen in many different ways and using it within a variety of different industries. And because of this, we're going to need a combination of short, medium, and long-term storage mechanisms. Short and medium-term hydrogen storage can be provided in the form of surface tanks, pipes, and caverns. And these storage devices have been used to store natural gas, chemicals, and indeed hydrogen for many years, and are all proven technologies. But we also need a large scale solution to be able to store seasonal quantities of hydrogen. If we want to decarbonize the energy storage, decarbonize natural gas, as Bill was saying, and balance the intermittent energy produced from renewable sources. So much like we do with natural gas at the moment, long-term storage can be provided within porous geological formations deep below the surface of the Earth. And this is shown on the graphic on the screen here. So the way porous geological storage works is that hydrogen is stored within the sandstone formation within the reservoir. So if you think of the sandstone as a large sponge, where the small pores between the clasts of the sandstone is where the hydrogen is stored. The storage mechanism requires a rock unit which is sufficiently porous so that economic amounts of hydrogen can be stored, and sufficiently permeable so that hydrogen can flow within the material and we're able to extract it at sufficient rates. It also requires a unit of impermeable rock called the cap rock, which overlies the sandstone, and this basically blocks the vertical migration of the hydrogen. And what we also need is a trapping mechanism to keep the hydrogen in place, preventing lateral migration. So as you can see on this on the picture here, we have a fault here which is almost seals the reservoir unit away, preventing any lateral migration. So this is a natural environment, and a good example of a porous environment where we can store hydrogen is a depleted gas reservoir. So this is a natural gas reservoir where the majority of the gas has been removed, extracted by us, by humans, and the pressure in the formation has been lowered. For me, they're very favourable environment to store hydrogen because they've got a proven ability to trap natural gas over geological timescales. So if they can trap natural gas for millions of years, then hopefully they'll be able to store hydrogen as well. They also have pre-existing infrastructure in place to extract and transport the gas. So we can use this infrastructure and retrofit it for hydrogen. And this will likely save huge investment costs. And also the geology of the sites are already very well known and well studied. And this will reduce the need for any very detailed geological investigations, which will again save huge investment costs. It also must be said that the storage of hydrogen within these porous formations has never been done, and a great deal of research is currently taking place in order to investigate the feasibility of the technology. In practice, it's very similar to the process of natural gas storage, and we can also learn a lot by the vast amount of research which has been carried out surrounding carbon capture and storage. So this at the moment is what I'm currently researching. So basically the porous environment where hydrogen can be stored is the same environment where CO2 can, where we want to sequester CO2 permanently in the bid to reduce CO2 output into the atmosphere. Therefore, in the future, these environments are going to be very important and indeed might well be contested. So my research builds on this principle, and I'm studying the dual storage of carbon dioxide and hydrogen with the aim of permanently storing the CO2 and temporarily storing the hydrogen. So the way it works is that initially the CO2 will be injected into the reservoir, and subsequently hydrogen will be injected and then removed to meet demand. And you can see that here on my figure. The cushion gas here is where the CO2 is, and hydrogen is at the top of the reservoir here. And to go into a bit more depth, the carbon dioxide within the reservoir is going to act almost like a spring, pushing the hydrogen back out the reservoir when we need it. So I'm going to be looking at the interactions between CO2 and hydrogen, how they mix, how they move around the reservoir, and these are very complex interactions. So we need to use advanced numerical modeling software to predict and interpret what will happen, or what we think will happen. So the storage of carbon dioxide alongside hydrogen will hopefully create an even more carbon negative storage operation, and also incentivize any synergistic uses for future geological formations and accelerate us towards our net zero goals. So I think that's all I have time for today, and I'll pass you back to Tarek. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Harri. This is really, of course, this is fascinating because renewable energy intermittency is always talked about as one of the major hurdles in the technology. And essentially, your work is looking at using hydrogen as part of a large battery system that can be compatible with excess renewable energy. But as Bill pointed out, the intermediate time, before we get to these large-scale renewable energy production systems, hydrogen can be taking off through other methods. And so these systems could be used also for hydrogen that's produced other ways in the medium term. And as you pointed out, Harri, your research is looking at a compatible way to store hydrogen in this battery system alongside carbon dioxide sequestration. So that's great. Thank you for sharing your research. All right. And Marc, I wonder if I can pass it on to you now to teach us about
Thank you, Tarek. Yeah, thank you, Tarek. I hope I can. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marc Cochrane. I'm a PhD student at the Open University. Now, this is rather towards the end of my career. I've spent about 30 years working in an international oil company in the production of oil and gas, looking at many of the similar reservoirs that Harri told you about. Let's take the story a little further back here. Oil and gas, hydrocarbons, and hydrogen are all really utilised as energy storage methods. Historically, post-industrial revolution, we looked at coal, wood, moving into petrol, diesel, kerosenes, alcohols, and latterly into natural gases and town gases. These were all developed in order to get energy to people, be it internationally or locally. We used tankers traditionally to take long-distance transports, and we had short distances in tanks and solid storage systems. However, all of these derive from hydrocarbons, and hence, if we burn them, we produce carbon dioxide, which is leading to global warming. So one of the things we've talked about in this forum is looking at decarbonising the energy system using hydrogen as a mechanism for that. The hydrogen is abundant. It's 75% of the universe and is readily available all over the planet Earth. However, it's very reactive and it's held in mostly in chemical substances, oil and gas being one of them. It's actually a fantastic storage mechanism. It contains long and medium term sources of energy, which could be moved around readily and which are packaged and for small users, cars, trains, airplanes even, and for bigger term solutions for long-term energy storage when, as we heard from Tarek, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. Now, there are better solutions for short-term storage. We've got compressed air systems, thermal systems, electric batteries, hydroelectricity, hydroelectric barriers, but none of these are able to store and transport energy in the medium and long terms. So I'm focusing on hydrogen as a source of energy which can be stored, utilised and reused both in the medium and long term. Now, where are we going to get the hydrogen from? I absolutely agree with Bill that there are many solutions of where we get hydrogen from in the rainbow of colours of hydrogen. I'm focusing on two methods. Primarily, the method would be from natural gas, where there's standard chemical reactions, steam methane reformation, where we can produce carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Now, unlike today, we must capture that carbon dioxide and store it in systems like Harri talked about earlier. These are traditionally stored in energy-dense countries like the Middle East or Africa, where they also have natural abundance of wind, wave, or solar systems. So they could augment that hydrogen with electric solutions where we could utilize the electricity produced from solar systems. So that takes us to a position where we have relatively effective sources of gaseous hydrogen. Now, we come to a slight problem here. Transporting of gaseous products globally hasn't really been done. You'd have to get to very high pressures and put them in ships which haven't been designed and hadn't utilized to date. Hydrogen is a very low temperature boiling gas. It actually boils at 20.3 Kelvin, some negative 253 degrees centigrade. So to get it into the liquid form is very energy intensive and hasn't really been done at scale to date. However, it would be uneconomic to use a fleet of ships to transport gaseous hydrogen. So we either have to use liquid hydrogen or look at other methods of transporting hydrogen. So we can look at liquefied gases. We currently have a big network of liquefied natural gas transporters across the globe. We could have some liquid hydrogen, but we can also look at chemical conversion and regeneration and using intermediate carriers called liquid organic hydrogen carriers. So let's just explore a few of these systems slightly to see what their capabilities are. The industry standard of transporting natural gases at the moment is with liquefied natural gas. These are tankers which operate negative 159 to negative 163 centigrade and transport liquid natural gas around the globe. There's about 700 of these tankers, which have, if you look at the hydrogen equivalent, ship about 8,000 tons of hydrogen per voyage. There are even some larger ones, around 50 in the world, which could transport 12 to 1,500 tons equivalent of hydrogen. So there's quite an interesting embedded tanker network currently, an LNG, which could transport hydrogen to any country in the globe. There is one proof of concept vessel called the Suzy Frontier, which transports liquid hydrogen. It's a small vessel, only transports 89 tons at a time, but it's trying to prove concept. That's currently transporting cargoes from Australia to Japan, and recently it did a trial cargo to Oman. If we look at chemical conversions, one of the chemicals which are favourable at the moment is ammonia. Ammonia is transported all over the world. It's relatively easy to convert hydrogen into ammonia in the Haber process. It can be stored at negative 50, which is not too cold, around atmospheric pressure. And there's some 1,100 tankers shipping around the world, quantities up to 9,500 tons of hydrogen equivalent in the form of ammonia. However, it's a captive market. These vessels are predominantly doing shorter journeys, satisfying chemical conversion companies, which are dominated by the fertilizer market. There's not any really spare capacity in that system. The other two chemical conversion techniques which are dominant in literature are methanol and formic acid. Now, these are theoretically good systems. There are no vessels currently around that transport methanol and formic acid, but both of these have a problem on reconstitution of hydrogen at the source port. They actually produce significantly more carbon dioxide than you would do if you were transporting liquefied natural gas. Methanol, it's double the quantity of carbon dioxide, and formic acid is actually 4 times the quantity of carbon dioxide. So given the fact that there are no vessels and there's an additional carbon dioxide load at the recipient port, that's not an area I'm really focused on research on. One area which is very interesting is liquid organic hydrogen carriers. These are just chemicals which you can convert to chemically add hydrogen and then reconstitute hydrogen later on. I looked at about 40 different types of liquid organic hydrogen carriers with a specific set of criteria. I was looking at hydrogen carriers which could utilize existing fleets. So that means they had to stay liquid, they had to be stable around 20 to 25 centigrade, and they had to have a low vapor pressure so we could target the existing crude oil tanker fleet. Two stand out. One is toluene, which when you hydrogenate it goes to methyl cyclohexane. That's a relatively straightforward process. It happens at low temperatures. Toluene goes to methyl cyclohexane at 120, and then you recover it at 450 degrees C. It's an exothermic reaction, i.e. it yields energy when you convert it to methyl cyclohexane and takes energy when you convert it back to hydrogen and toluene. The toluene would act as a return shipment. So you would ship methyl cyclohexane, return toluene, and that goes in a large circle. The process is about 95 to 97% efficient in conversion, but the toluene basically acts as an inert carrier. Both those produced energy and required energy at redemption. However, it's a reversible reaction. Depending on how you configure the heat exchanger network, you can recover most of the energy or provide it from alternate sources overall the entire process. The second and other very interesting pair was a chemical group called dibenzyltoluenes, which, when you add hydrogen, gives the same sort of hydrogen carrying capability. Again, starts at 180 degrees C, returns at 270 to 310 degrees C. Both of these chemicals can be transported to areas where they require hydrogen, and then the carrier chemical can be dehydrogenated chemical can return back to the source port as a recycled product. Now, there are many oil tankers in the world at the moment. If we take the two typical types, the 1,000 barrel tankers, the Suezmaxes, and the 2 million barrel tankers, the VLCCs, a Suezmax can transport around 78,000 tons of hydrogen equivalent per cargo, and a VLCC 14 to 17,000 tons per cargo. Now, these are very interesting. So as the dependence on oil reduces, these vessels are no longer required. They could be utilized to transport liquid organic hydrogen carriers, which would have the benefit of transporting clean hydrogen around the world and reutilize the existing fleet of ships available. So in summary, hydrogen is a very promising mobile and medium-term and long-term energy vector, which is several shipping options which can utilize existing fleets and technologies. Tarek, I'll hand that back to you now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Marc. And yeah, as I had expected, you did teach us lots about hydrogen distribution systems, and it's clear your chemical engineering background comes out so wonderfully in your research. You can really tell your history as you start talking about the various chemicals and really the fundamental aspects in how they can be used to move hydrogen around. So that was really enlightening. And I have to say that these what if scenarios that you had walked through and the different carbon consequences, I mean, I can see the benefits in that kind of research, informing policy, informing new technologies. So it's yeah, really a rich study that you've done, and thanks for sharing that. All right, so I think now, Bill, maybe you could teach us about hydrogen and how it's used in transport problems.
Yes, thanks, Tarek. I think I'll go wide and then I'll become more focused and more specific. Okay, so the first thing to say is I said earlier that one can look to the future and ask oneself, to what extent is everything going to be done by 2050 through electrification, based on the notion of moving to a zero carbon electricity system? And my view is that the scale of the challenge and the speed of the challenge are such that, you know, electrification will play a huge role and grow greatly, but won't take us all the way, right? And you know, what are the challenges out there that are not yet electrified? Steel making. Now, you could do the transition to electric arc steel recycle, but if you actually want to turn iron ore into steel, it's blast furnaces, and blast furnaces could be decarbonized with hydrogen. Another one is the liquid fuels, right? The liquid fuels challenge. Liquid fuels have key advantages, and cellulosic biofuels, they need hydrogenation. Gas turbines, wherever they are, in planes, for instance, there's an opportunity there, and that links across to the wider set of issues around heavy transport, planes and trains and trucks and buses, which are attractive propositions for hydrogen without going through electricity, and I'll make that point more strongly in a minute. I do slightly worry that, with reference to the opening question that Victoria gave us about the UK and stuff, which is that I hope that by enthusiastically pushing electrification, we don't close down on molecular options like hydrogen and synfuels, because I certainly don't take the view that electrification is a no regrets option in every example it might be deployed. I think we could end up having regretted that we assumed electrification when a low carbon molecular solution might have been preferable. You will see a lot of discussion about British domestic heating and many points of view that would argue that, basically hydrogen doesn't stack up. I think that the cautionary comment I'd make there is that these kind of analyses are really, really complicated. That's the first thing to say. And the boundary of one's model and the assumptions that one takes are very, very fundamental to the conclusion that one gets. So, for instance, if one takes as axiomatic the idea that there's going to be a lot of low carbon electricity, and that can take you to the idea that electrification of hydrogen takes you to green hydrogen, takes you to electricity storage, and all that narrative that I discussed earlier. Right? I think one sees that a lot in the European debate around hydrogen, which until relatively recently was dominated by a presumption that the green hydrogen was going to be what would happen and what should happen. Right? And indeed, I say again, I think there will be a great expansion of green hydrogen. But I think there's something bigger than that going to occur, and I see that when I look across at the US, because not many British academics do this, and because I was trained and studied in the US, I spend my time looking at the US and Canada as an example of another way as regards hydrogen futures. I'm not saying a better way, I'm just saying a different way. Right? And that leads you to other observations, right? And I said earlier that, with the British domestic heating thing, it depends on what you assume, right? And what's in the model, right? And I spend a lot of time with economists, right? And so, the price of the proposition, the total lifetime costs, the total lifetime environmental impacts. These are all very important considerations. But just to reveal my thinking a little bit further, I'd like to just sort of tell an illustrative story that comes from having looked at the US. It's a kind of anecdotal thing, I admit it, but I just want to reveal how numbers matter, but not necessarily the numbers most people look at. Right, so I want to talk about the proposition that some company in the future that either makes expensive training shoes or very advanced smartphones wants to take a little box about this big, that it's worth more than $1,000 in terms of the product in the box. It only weighs about 500 grams, and they want to take it to sell it in the suburbs of Chicago in Illinois, right? And it's been made in China, and it somehow crossed the Pacific on a low carbon ship, let's say. We can have another discussion about it. That could have been hydrogen powered, right? But let's say it gets to Long Beach, California. And it's going to go on its way to Illinois, which is 2/3 of the way across America. And they're going to send it on a truck, right? Which they own and control from the training shoe company or the smartphone company, isn't it? So it heads out of Long Beach and it starts driving. And this comes to the first statistic that I want to say is relevant. In the US, a truck driver, as far as I know, can drive for 11 hours as a working rotor. That number in Europe is 9. 11 helps hydrogen. Yeah, the next thing is, so what they do is they drive for 3.5 hours. They stop for 20 minutes. They go to the loo. They might get a nice cup of coffee rather than the one they've got in their thermos flask. And they fill up the truck. I'll say a bit more about that in the next comment. Then they get back in the truck. And then they drive again. And again, they stop for 20 minutes. And then they keep driving. And now they're, 10.5 hours in. And they're coming up. They can see the lights of the place they plan to sleep the night. It might be Moab, Utah. 11 hours. And they just climbed the Rocky Mountains. So doing that with a battery electric vehicle, double quick charging and climb the mountains at the end of the day, that's a challenge that, you know, points to hydrogen. Why? Well, it's a rather complex matter, but I'm very indebted to Charles Forsberg at MIT for a wonderful remark that I think explains it all, which is that diesel trucks, the ones we have today, and hydrogen vehicles don't have to carry the weight of their oxidizing agent. It comes from the air. Whereas if you've got a battery electric vehicle, you're carrying your oxidizing agent all the way. They're very big and heavy. Now, there are breakthrough technologies, solid state batteries and stuff. They could change everything. I concede that point. But right now, hydrogen looks very, very attractive for trucking. And the next thing to say is, I said I'd give you a couple of statistics. One was 9 hours versus 11 hours. The other thing is filling up the truck. I said 20 minutes, right? The tanks are huge, right? You may not know this, right? But if you, in the US, if you fill up your car, it's 50 liters a minute. Oh, by the way, I should say that 1 liter of diesel, if you want to do the back of the envelope, is 38 megajoules, right? Okay, so if you fill up your car, it's 50 liters a minute. If you fill up a truck, it's 130 liters a minute. Right? And then imagine that there's a truck stop, maybe on the way to Utah or in Iowa, right? It's on the interstate. Let's say it's got 20 bays. And let's say on average, 12 of them are filling. That's running at a gigawatt. That's a gigawatt, right? If you did it with electricity, you'd need a nuclear power plant, right? I mean, it's huge amounts of energy. Don't underestimate the amount of energy that goes into American trucking. So with those various statistics, and I haven't mentioned any costs, I think I've started to make a case for hydrogen in heavy trucking. So I think that in key ways that America's going to lead, and I think that it's not, I think quite possibly now the policy environment after the Inflation Reduction Act and various other measures like the 45Q, to get a bit jargony, the American policy environment is ready and sufficient. Yeah, and two kind of comments come to mind. One is that, you know, I lived in America when Ronald Reagan was president, right? And one of the most famous things he ever said was that the scariest words in the English language were, "I'm from the government and here to help you." The hydrogen future in the US doesn't need the government help. There's a sufficient help now to get going. Just look at ExxonMobil's recent moves for blue hydrogen in the Gulf of Mexico. And the other thing to say is my personal view about the 60 years of decarbonisation from 1990 to 2050 is, for the first 30 years now behind us, the universities, think tanks, the political parties, they led the way with great ideas and sensitising the public to the challenge ahead. But right now, I think the next 30 years are going to be led by industrial leadership. It's not the role of government to get out of the way. Government has to be a key stakeholder, but industry will implement it. And I think if it's going to be $1 trillion transition, you know, that existing expertise is going to be vital if we do it by 2050. And I think it's going to be very exciting. And as I say, there will be a lot of electrification, a lot of green hydrogen, but I think there's going to be a lot of blue hydrogen as well. There might even be some nuclear, red and pink and purple. So with that, I think I'll stop. I'll hand it over. Back to you, Tarek, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. That's I mean, I love this use of such an illustrative example to substantiate quite a bold future for hydrogen. So thank you for taking us through that so carefully. I think I'm now going to switch gears a little bit to talking about a slightly more local hydrogen project, and I think that's maybe with the new slide coming up. Anyways, I'll start on it. Oh, perfect. Here it comes. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I along with well, I should start this way actually. So as we've talked about, hydrogen can come from many different sources, and one of those sources is waste streams. So at the OU, myself and collaborators are investigating a novel thermal waste treatment method using smoldering combustion. So as you can see from the background of this slide, smoldering is a flameless form of combustion, and you can see it as that glowing surface on the charcoal briquette, which is often seen in a barbecue. But one of the key advantages of smoldering is that it fosters a highly resilient form of combustion. And what that means is that we can design reactors that harness this resilient combustion to manage challenging wastes. And those wastes might be things that have high moisture content. So a waste with a high moisture content that's very wet would often require some form of dewatering, some expensive processing before it undergoes a thermal treatment process like incineration. But that we may not need to go through those extensive dewatering steps if we use a smoldering system, because we can handle very challenging, very wet wastes, for example. So using smoldering, we have the potential to simplify a waste treatment process and also lower the overall energy footprint of a scheme. So in this photo, I've shown two examples of smoldering reactors. On the left is about an oil drum-sized reactor that we would use for research purposes to understand the dynamics and these smoldering systems. And overlaying on that picture is an infrared image from a smoldering experiment, basically showing the thermal wave in the system, basically read by the hot outer surface of that reactor insulation. And on the right-hand side is a full-scale smoldering system. This photo is from my Canadian collaborators who commercialized this technology, where the waste would actually be loaded into those concrete bays and treated. So we've been exploring smoldering primarily as a remediation and a hazardous waste management technology, really to try to treat challenging materials due to their environmental liabilities. So we focused heavily on things like crude oil sludge, which is a byproduct from the oil and gas industry, and also treating contaminated soils. But now we're beginning to reimagine these systems, and we're starting to explore how we can tune them, not only to remove environmental liabilities, but to produce valuable energy and resources, such as hydrogen. So at the OU, alongside industry collaborators, Savron from Canada, we are exploring how we can use these smoldering systems to transform challenging wastes into hydrogen. So that's just a brief example of some of the extra research on hydrogen that we're doing at the OU. And with that, I'll hand it off to Victoria. Thanks.
Thank you. So some very thought-provoking sharing there. I've been monitoring the chat. Thank you very much for everybody who's put in questions. And I'm conscious of time, but I think if I paraphrase, I think what we've got that I put to you, the panel, we've got some grave concerns about the environmental impacts of hydrogen. And so how quickly do you think we can make hydrogen net zero? Who would like to? Bill, would you like to?
I'll try to start this off, right? I think that there's two things really, is the time scale of the transition and the scale of the transition, right? And what we have here is we're coming up against the time scale of technological innovation. So frankly, I would suggest that to a first approximation, the technologies that we're going to need to get to 2050 have to exist already. Now, you might take the view that means that I'd be speaking against hydrogen and in favour of electrification. But what I do want to say is that the hydrogen industry is not new. The hydrogen industry has been around for 100 years. There is a hydrogen industry. You can buy hydrogen, and there are people who do buy hydrogen. It turns out they tend to be in the oil and gas and fertilizer areas. But there is already quite a substantial business in hydrogen. So, you know, as someone who looks more at blue hydrogen than green, I'd say there is an issue of scale up, building upon existing technical things. The thing that is relatively new is carbon capture and storage, but it's not entirely new. And again, it's the oil and gas sector who know a lot about this. There's two ways to look at carbon capture and storage. One is that you would put the carbon dioxide in, let's say, a saline aquifer, an underground lake. Yes, and indeed there are projects underway to do exactly that. The other place you could put it, reminded me of the graph, the picture that Harri put up, which is where you've got a good impermeable capstone rock and a kind of a space underneath. Well, that's an oil and gas resource, right? So, you know, carbon dioxide has been pushed underground for years and years as part of enhanced oil recovery. Basically, it's a slightly acidic fluid that helps push the oil out, and that's why they did it. But you know, that cap rock is impermeable except for the little holes that were drilled in it by humans to go looking for oil and gas. So as long as you know where the pinprick holes are and seal them up, that's actually a very good place to store carbon dioxide. In the limit, enhanced oil recovery becomes CCS, right? So I think what I tried to say is there's a lot of opportunity for incremental innovation within the oil and gas sector. So there are many people in the space of energy transition and concern about climate change who regard the fossil fuel incumbents as the problem, and of course, in some sense, they are. Right? But they're also the solution. I would suggest. I would be nervous about excluding their capabilities. We have to test their sincerity, but I think that the capabilities are real. So if you want to really to get this done that quickly and at that scale, I think that takes one to being open to what industry can offer, and through policy forcing them to move to goodness. And the risk that they, even if they want to do it, they can't do it, is, I would say, the main thing to look at is methane leakage. But they've been tightening, again, they've been tightening the flanges for other reasons already. And then the other thing is, of course, this net zero thing. I'd say that it is an aspiration, like, the US Declaration of Independence was an aspirational document. Nobody was equal, and no one, a large part of the population wasn't free in the 18th century, but it's still a good document, right? We really do have to hit net zero. We really do have to move in that direction, right? But and we have to think how we can get there most quickly and at scale. And the fact that something still has a very small amount of emissions in 2025 is not a reason it should be thrown in the bin. It should be tightened up. That's my view. So I think it's, all hands to the pumps: green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, red hydrogen, and no hydrogen at all with electrification. I think we need everything. And then there'll be a shakedown of what's economically attractive. That's my view.
Thank you, Bill. Tarek, I know you want to come in. I'm really conscious of our stop in just 60 seconds. So I feel like this has been a really great start to a much longer conversation, which we invite you to partake in with us, about the future of hydrogen in the UK. And just to sum up what I heard and what I learned today, what would it take? Well, it would take collaboration. I've heard colleagues speak from many different perspectives, and I can also see that you're interested in each other's solutions, so you're weaving together and learning from each other. So we are the Open University. We're open to people, places, methods and ideas, and we invite you to continue the conversation with us offline. We'll be posting resources on our web pages, and we're really delighted to be a sponsor for Green Infrastructure, Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week, and we look forward to meeting with hopefully all of you in the future. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you to our panel for their time. Thank you to our audience for joining us over the lunchtime, and we look forward to future sessions. Thank you very much and goodbye, everybody.